Teachers of Reddit. What clicked about a pupil after meeting their parents? Story 1, obligatory, not a teacher, but I work at a psychiatric hospital for children and teens. I work directly with the kids, so I don't get to meet parents often. We had a super sweet little girl on my unit once. They said it was because she assaulted her little 3-year-old sister, but the whole thing just didn't make sense. I can read kids well, and usually the ones that are violent and dangerous to family have a certain attitude. She just didn't. She was meek, respectful, and just overall the easiest patient ID ever had. When visitation came, her parents showed up, and it all started to make sense. They would just berate her for everything. Here is this little 9-year-old girl, and her mom is telling her she's up. Why can't she be normal, etc., etc.? And this kid just took it. Not for long, though, because I'm allowed to remove the child at my discretion if I think it will make it worse for her. And so I did, and promptly called CPS. It turns out that all the abuse she was doing to her sister was just the mother abusing both of them, and then blaming it on the little girl. You'll all be happy to know that she was moved in with her grandparents in a different state, and is thriving and happy. Edit, thank you for the gold, y'all. Edit too. There are ways to volunteer your time helping children by becoming an advocate. The state always needs them, and you get to do good. If you're moved to do so, here is the link for the National Child Advocacy in the U.S. Story 2, I noticed quite a few negative stories here. Well, here's a positive one where it clicked. I have a student who is really friendly, really smart, and amazing at English. I am an ESL teacher abroad. She's always really friendly to me and always really hardworking. She constantly helps other kids in class who struggle with the material, and overall, just a great girl. I met her dad once at a school event, and holy goodness was this guy awesome. He was a really genuine and generous character, and even invited me to get to know different parts of the city with his family. I could definitely tell they had a close bond, and that he had raised her really well. Just an example of good people raising other good people. Edit a word. Story 3, my 5th grade teacher said she understood why at times I couldn't finish my homework or fall asleep in class after seeing my mother had cancer. I'm sure before that she thought I was lazy. She became super close with my mom after, and the day my mom passed away, still in 5th grade, she cried in class when I messaged her. And that's how I knew it was over. I personally believe teachers make a huge impact in a child's life, and she really helped me out and understood. Story 4, this is from back when I was doing my student teaching. There was a girl in one of my classes that never did any work in class, turned in her homework late, and would ignore huge projects until literally the last minute, and then asked to come in for help every day at lunch after school to make up for the missing work. Eventually, I caught her cheating on a quiz. She had written down the answers, put them in the plastic cover of her binder, and put her binder down by her feet. I took her quiz, gave her a 0, and told her that cheating wasn't allowed. About a week later, we had parent-teacher conferences. The girl came with her mother, who took out every assignment that had been graded and handed back, and proceeded to argue with me over individual points. Things along the lines of, well, she spelled it all right, so that deserves some credit, right? Or she circled the right answer, so she should still get some credit. When that right answer had been crossed off, and then another answer had been selected, this took nearly an hour to go through. Finally, the mother brought up the quiz, and I told her about the cheating. The mom said, well, you should give her some credit on it. She was pretty clever to think of that trick. From then on, I made sure to schedule meetings with myself, my mentor teacher, and the principal present. Story 5, this girl in prep already showed traits of a narcissist sociopath. She was an extremely clever, but lacked empathy, manipulative, blatantly lied, stole, and so on. Yes, this might just sound like characteristics of any child, but there was definitely something different about her. Anyway, met her mom, who refused to accept that her child would do anything wrong. And when the child admitted she stole a girl's bracelet because she wanted it, her mom said, that's okay, we could go buy you one on the way home. Story 6, I was telling the parent that their child was generally inattentive. He would look around, fidget, and just nod along, smiling. When I knew it hadn't been listening, as I was consulting my notes, I looked up to see the parent looking around the room, bouncing their leg. As soon as they realized that I was done talking, they nodded and smiled. Edit, this child did not have ADHD or autism. He just had a short attention span. I was teaching a private school in the Middle East, and although most students should have been ESL, they were taught English at a higher level. I figure he just didn't care that much. Story 7, college freshman was constantly late, didn't turn working on time or at all, etc. She had an excuse for every single thing. I wasn't even asking. She just volunteered excuses after getting a D in my class, which was frankly a bit generous as her actual grade was a high F. Her mother called me. I wasn't allowed to discuss a student's performance with anyone, including their parents, and I told her as much. Her mother then, unprompted, gave me a long string of excuses for her daughter and, oddly, herself. I kind of thought, oh, that makes sense now. Story 8, not a teacher, but I do volunteer work for a program designed to help students who are habitually truant. Had one middle schooler who was super bright, genuinely seemed to love school, got great grades, but was absent about half the time. He was very evasive about why he wasn't coming to class, and I honestly didn't put him high on my list because he was doing fine even with the missed days. When I was finally able to get a social worker to go by his house, it turned out his single mother was having seizures and didn't have any health care, so she couldn't get treatment for them. And the kid was staying home to take care of both her and his younger brother. I felt just terrible for the kid having to be so adult while still in middle school. Story 9, kid named Rowdy. Super nice kindergartner, wondered why his name was Rowdy. Met his mom. Dad was MIA, lived with grandma in a hoarder house, and they smoked inside with the window closed. He graduated last spring. Saw him walking in the rain at 9 a.m. Not sure where he was headed, but all I could think was he was headed in the wrong direction. Story 10, I was that kid. Father worked shifts, and when he was home, he was doing backyard car repairs to help make ends meet. Not because he didn't earn a good living, he actually did, but because my mother was a gambling addict. Instead of addressing the problem, he focused on solving the symptoms. I went to school from an unheated house with a mother still in bed and no breakfast in freezing weather with no coat because she spent the money on gambling. Went for years without medical treatment for the same reason. No toothpaste, no hair conditioner, no haircuts, old shoes, socks, and underwear with holes. All because anything she could make us do without went to gambling. PE was done in the frigid school gym in bare feet and a t-shirt because gym shoes and sweatshirts cost money that could be used to make bets instead. One day, the vice principal called me to her office, not to reprimand me, but to give me the optional pieces of uniform. I didn't have like a coat and a school blazer. They were the options without which you froze half to death as you walked or biked several miles to school. She didn't make a big deal out of it. She simply met a need. Her act of kindness lit a spark in me. To this day, almost 40 years later, I still put money, time, and hard work into caring for others and charity work. In the mom who will volunteer at school, quietly contribute anything the teachers are short of. That person, not for recognition or thanks. In fact, I am embarrassed if you do that. It's because nearly 40 years ago someone cared. Story 11, not a teacher, but a student. In kindergarten, we had this kid who was really odd and smelled funny, but he seemed cool, so we would hang out at recess. I had a birthday party, and it was only supposed to last maybe a few hours. All of the kids, but him, went home fairly early, but it was really late, and his parents still hadn't showed up. I was getting tired and wanted to go to bed, so my parents set up some blankets for us in the living room, and we had a sleepover. At 2 a.m., his parents finally show up after multiple calls with no answer. Instantly, I realized what was up. Even as a small child, I knew these parents were the definition of white trash. They reeked of alcohol. My mom's side of the family is full of alcoholics, so I knew what it smelled like. They also told some bullshit story about how they had new tires of their car, and the speedometer showed the wrong speed. They got pulled over, and some other bullshit. It all clicked why he acted so odd, and why he smelled it was cigarette smoke. At the start of first grade, he never showed up, and like a month into the year, he was there for a few days. Then randomly in third grade, he showed back up again for a few weeks. I never saw him again after that. I looked him up on Facebook a while back, and it looks like he is following in his parents' footsteps up, falling into every white trash stereotype. I asked my parents about this kid a while ago, and they said that the reason he wasn't with us in school for a few years is that he got taken away by Child Protective Services, which my mom called. Then he came back the W times because that's when his parents got him back, but he was taken away again, and that's why he left us. I feel bad for the kid because at first he was really nice, but over time as I saw him again, he became more mean and rude. Such shitty parents. Story 12, obviously an extreme example here, but I had a student, an 8th grader, who was quiet to the point of absolute silence, but who did extraordinarily well with the written word. A few times he showed up with bruises, which I naturally reported, but he was adamant that they were from other students. Surprisingly, his parents came in for PTC and seemed relatively normal, until he went to speak for himself, and I saw his father grip his arm so tightly that it left a mark. I understood immediately that his parents basically didn't let him speak at all for fear of reprisal. A few weeks afterward, the kid stopped showing up to school, and word eventually got around that he got caught up in a meth lab explosion in his parents' house and was covered head to toe in 2nd and 3rd degree burns. He came back a month or so later, covered in bandages. He couldn't move, write, or really do anything without excruciating pain. ID never cried so hard as I did that day. Sorry, I know it got off track, but there are certain stories that stick with you. Story 13 didn't actually meet the parents, but was recently told about the parents of a 9th grader I have. Apparently, the dad is super verbally abusive, constantly belittling the son, like bordering on reportable abuse, but just not quite over that line, his former teachers said. This kid acts out, is constantly seeking positive attention, has no self-esteem, despite being pretty smart and capable. It all just makes a lot of sense now. Edit: for all the people who are saying that I should report it, I have not personally witnessed the abuse, nor have I even met the parents in question, so it wouldn't be appropriate for me to report it anyway. In fact, in my state, there are penalties if I were to do so. But moreover, I trust my colleagues who have taught him and have witnessed the negative interactions with the dad, and I believe that they have the requisite experience and judgment to have been able to make the determination not to report the father. Edit 2. Thank you all for your concern, though. And I'm very sorry for those who have gone through something like this. Story 14. I'm the kid. When I was growing up, I'd get pulled aside and asked if I smoked. I'm talking elementary school. My parents, much like someone else had mentioned, smoked in the house with the windows closed. I was heavy, really heavy, with a lot of confidence issues that still stick around today. I had problems with anger growing up, not so much now. But I was an excellent student when you could inspire me to focus or found something I was passionate about. They'd meet my parents and nod to me. My dad, who would work swing and overtime every day, almost to support my mom's 2 to 3 pack a day habit at the time. Now, it's only 1 pack, supposedly. My mom, who basically looked strung out on drugs, but was really just taking so many antipsychotics and pain meds that she might as well have been. My parents tried to be supportive of me, but I'm not sure they really knew how. I'd keep a bottle of Febreze on me, starting in middle school, because the questioning from teachers got worse. I'm graduating college in June, even though it's taken me twice as long as it should have, mostly because of money, a lack of guidance, and my own mental BS. I got a job working in student government for the first time ever and was sent to a conference in Washington, D.C. by my college last year. I worked my first non-minimum wage job this summer and got invited to come back with another raise. To my 4th and 5th grade teacher, if you're reading this, I'm okay, I did it, and I hope your ladybug collection has grown. Edit: holy moly, RIP my inbox, and thank you to the lovely stranger with gifting my first gold. Thank you so much for all of the lovely comments. I'm trying not to cry on the train of my vacation. It means the world to me. Story 15. A girl in my 7th grade class was really bright, but almost never turned in her homework, so she just skated by on test scores. One time, I commended her for helping another student who didn't understand the assignment, only to realize that night that she didn't do her own. I called her parents in and quickly realized they're the type that have an answer for everything, and were all too quick to put the responsibility on me, as if I should stand over their daughter to make sure she works. I turned to ask the girl what she thought, since she had been completely quiet, and her parents began to answer for her again. I put my finger index up and said, "No, you've had your turn. I want to hear what she thinks about all this." Well, she apparently really appreciated that, because she went on for about 30 minutes about all her views on education. At the end, I kept her parents quiet and told her that if she's willing to talk such a big game, she needs to back it up and do the work without her parents or me interfering. She didn't miss another assignment all year. Proud teacher moment. Story 16. These children, there were 3 of them, were known for being difficult at the after-school care I worked in. I had always heard bad things about Dad, but not until I actually experienced it firsthand did I make the connection between his parenting and his kids' behavior. The eldest, 5th grade, would refuse to listen to us. He would often kick other children, provoke them by grabbing them and pulling them in close, or just act out in a way that was verbally abusive. When we asked him to stop, he would respond with "screw you." The middle 3rd grade struggled to pay attention for more than 5 minutes, and often picked on other kids by intentionally stirring them up and spreading rumors. The youngest kindergarten was 6, but still not entirely toilet trained, and had to repeat kindergarten because she wasn't at normal developmental or social levels. One afternoon, the eldest is in a pretty good mood because I'm curious. I ask, and he announces proudly, "Dad is picking me up early at 4 p.m. because we're going to see a movie this afternoon. This is awesome because the 3 kids are always last to be picked up, but 4 p.m. comes and goes, and there's no sign of Dad for 30 p.m., 5 p.m., 6 p.m., 6:30 p.m. It's closing time. We get a call from Dad. I'm sorry, I got caught up. It's almost 7 p.m. before Dad arrives. As the kid grab their bags, he tries to explain to me, but he's sort of all over the place. Some actual quotes from our conversation: "Don't tell the kids, but I'm so gone right now. I stayed back with some mates and had some drinks." Investment banking is stressful, so you look forward to Friday. So you'd be, what, 20 now? What's a young pretty thing like you doing working so late on Friday night? He offers to slip some cash to me and my coworker for the extra time. My mate is driving us home. I only trust some of my mates with a new Porsche. The nail in the coffin was when eldest asked Dad, "I thought you said we were going to see that movie tonight." To which he replies simply, "Oh, yes, sorry, May, I forgot." And in that moment, I realized that these kids were being told over and over, "You don't really matter that much to me." Edit: about 2 months after this happened, the kids packed up and left the school with about a week's notice. Although they told us how much they hated us regularly, I had never seen them all as quiet as in that last week. We haven't seen them since. Edit formatting. Story 17. My wife called a student's parents to talk about the kid swearing all the time and general bad attitude. After explaining to the mom why she was calling, I told that God kid a million times to watch his mouth. Jesus Christ, wait till his daddy gets home. Story 18 had a kid that you looked at, and it was very much a lights are on, but nobody is home sort of feeling. I teach high school, so sometimes that's just the phase they are in, but this one was basically living perpetually in that mode. Kid has an IEP, Individualized Educational Plan, which is a legal special education doc. I can't reveal what was in there, but it was, suffice to say, generic, so it feels like there are pieces missing. Days go on. This kid is the gold standard of something is up. Completely illegible handwriting to the point it doesn't resemble writing. You ask about what we're doing in class, and the answer is so random and off-task that if the kid didn't look and act fairly childlike for their age, you would assume hardcore drug use. But this kid, if anything, had Ralph Wiggum jeans and didn't know what drugs were. Mom comes to back to school night, which is supposed to be 5 minutes with the class of parents. A nice how do you do? And everyone moves on. She corners me. Immediately starts telling me about her concerns that I don't fully appreciate her miracle baby who was mute until 8, didn't walk until 4, walked backwards first, and had an IQ of about 60. They told her this kid would never make it in school, and didn't I think you just COULDNE tell anything was ever delayed, because this is a miracle. That's why she blocked all mention of those conditions from the documents, because people would never guess otherwise. Miracle. When the word miracle comes up from a parent, it always explains a lot. 0. Story 19. Ninth grader thought she was entitled to an A despite her work not being A quality work, let alone B quality. Met her mom a few weeks into the school year, who happens to be on our board of directors. She also has a habit of treating teachers as if they're lesser thans, and is essentially enabled by our school founder. On top of that, her son, a senior at the time, didn't earn college acceptance. However, our principal lied at graduation and said had gotten into a university he hadn't actually been admitted to. Why? Because our school is touted as a college preparatory. Can't possibly mar our good name. Story 20. We had a crazy kid in 6th grade a few years back. I mean, he was the type of kid you assume will probably go on a shooting spree at some point. He was diagnosed with all sorts of acronyms acrostics, so he was on a ton of meds. On his medicine, he was defiant, but manageable, typical class clown type stuff. Off his medicine, oh man. We could all tell when he came in the building whether or not he had taken it. It was in his eyes or something. He routinely refused to do anything and had to be physically carried, limp-bodied, to the principal's office a few times. He hit a teacher once and called another 1A to her face in the same day. We had parent-teacher night, and his mom came in. She was 26, he was 12. It became clear to us that the reason he was off meds so much was because she was taking them. She had also just had another baby, so he was acting out more. Because of that, his mother had a very low IQ, clearly, and so did he. He ended up getting sent to alternative school eventually, never saw him again. Story 21. My best friend is a teacher. He told about this one kid's parents he met. The kid was insanely smart, 12th, genius level. He would finish his work and just play on his phone or talk to friends, but he had 0 homework turn-in rate. My friend requested to meet his parents. Ended up finding out that his father would beat him repeatedly, and the kid would never truly go home, but rather take up working instead of being home with his father. It was sad because the kid admitted that he was capable of doing his homework, but he was too scared to and just didn't have to be able to face his dad. Apparently, later the kid came back to meet a couple teacher, including my friend. He rolled up in a BMW i8. I guess he made it out somewhere. Story 22. I had 2 10-year-old obese twins, met their parents and saw where it came from. Edit, didn't expect this. I feel like I should add that they weren't the brightest kids in class either. Probably had something to do with their poor eating habits. Story 23. I had a 2nd grade student who was constantly getting into pretty serious physical altercations with others, stabbing kids with pencils, slapping girls across the face, etc. The first time I met his mom was when she came up to the school threatening to choke me because I said her son couldn't come on a field trip to the pumpkin patch because he was too violent. Story 24. When I was student teaching 2nd grade, there was a little boy in the class who was just a genuinely friendly and sweet kid. He struggled a little academically when it came to learning to read, and his handwriting had some problems, but he was the hardest worker and never got frustrated or thought that we was stupid like many other students with those difficulties do. He was well-liked by everyone and didn't have a mean bone in his body. And he was extremely well-adjusted, despite the fact that his parents were divorced. I ended up meeting both parents separately during field trips. Both parents were extremely involved in his life and put him ahead of any of their problems they have with each other. They genuinely want what's best for him, and it shows. The dad takes him out to the sports bar for boys' night where they share root beer, which I thought was really cool. Both parents genuinely are awesome people with great attitudes, and it definitely shows in their kid. Story 25, student teaching for high school seniors and juniors. I had this guy that was a shady 80, no specific problems, just very low intelligence. But this guy worked his off. Never a late assignment. Did all extra credit that was offered. Usually extra credit is done by those who don't need it and ignored by those who do need it. Made flashcards for like every test and quiz, even though I never said to model student, just had low test scores. If it was an assignment that could be done with time and effort, he did it. Unfortunately, tests aren't like that. And that's where he had the most problems. Back to school night comes along, and I meet his dad, an NCO in the Marines, courteous, well-spoken, and completely knowledgeable about all of his son's upcoming assignments and grades. Totally made sense. Kid is getting through with hard work and dedication and pulling off a B average. Amazing what support from parents can do. In most cases, a kid like this would probably be failing most of his classes. Story 26. I have one little boy who is strange. He either sits in a corner muttering to himself, or he's trying to hug the life out of other kids. His twin sister is also in our class, and he needs to be reminded often that he is inappropriately touching her. He is 5, but he can't do anything. He freaks out about having to put his own shoes on, putting away his things, everything. On top of all of that, he will only eat PB&J sandwiches, so at school it's just J. And then I met his dad. Oh my BB, you are the cutest BB in the whole world. You don't have to do one single thing when daddy's HERE. And then it clicked. Story 27, one of my students is safe playing. He won't try any new ideas while doing maths and would frequently look out to applying some formulas. I used to think that he genuinely is less creative than others. But at times, particularly when playing games, he would show bursts of real brilliance. When I met his mother, it clicked why. The mother burst into tears, saying she was afraid what would happen if the child would fail. She really desperately wanted him to succeed, and because of this desire has all but closed his chances of success. He is so afraid of failure that he doesn't even try. There was another one, he was really afraid of both succeeding and failing. His line of thinking went like, if I succeed, the parents would expect more. So let's fail, then he will flip. If I fail, they will scold me. He led a torturous life. I have a belief that the two biggest blocks in the development of a child are his school and his parents. Most of the flaws in a kid's personality can be attributed to one of the two or both. Story 28, not yet a teacher, but studying to be one in one of my major field experiences. There was a kid who was insanely competitive. He would take everything as a challenge and would accuse others of cheating if he lost. He even challenged me, a 19-year-old student at the time, to a race. I told him it really wouldn't be fair since I was fully grown, and he started berating me that I was scared to race him. Mind you, he was 9 at the time, so the end of the year is coming around, and we had a field day where parents volunteered to do games for the kids, and it was supposed to be a fun day full of popsicles and school games. His parents had a relay race spin around the bat, jump rope a certain distance, etc., and when it was his turn, they encouraged him to cheat by not following their rules and got upset because some poor girl dropped the bat, obviously meaning she would be disqualified. They also brought a tug-of-war rope, and it was the girls of the class versus the boys. The girls being outnumbered, my field experience teacher put me on their team. I decided I wouldn't tug, so that it was a bit more fair, but once again the student's parents started getting red-faced, telling him to win. I looked at my field experience teacher, and she just nodded, and I pulled. Kid got knocked down a peg. Story 29, when I was student teaching, I had a student who seemed to have textbook fetal alcohol syndrome. Then one day, I saw her with her mother at Target, and I recognized her mother as one of the longtime regulars, i.e. chronic alcoholics at a bar I worked at in college. The whole thing made sense, and it was very sad. Story 30, I don't know if this counts, but I used to help tutor ESL to Spanish-speaking immigrants. There was one woman who was super focused and dedicated and was making real improvements lesson to lesson, but she would miss massive amounts of time because she said she had to work, take care of her kid, and it really hurt her studies. She was stressed and frustrated all of the time, even though she said she loved her job and was doing all right for herself. Then one day, she brought her mother in because she hadn't been to tutoring in a month and needed to come, I guess. That woman was a terror. She wasn't even that old, probably in her late 50s. She yelled at her granddaughter, who also came along, and would smack her randomly, complaining that she was so ill-behaved. It clicked that the woman was missing so much time because she had to babysit her mother just as much as her daughter. I felt so bad for her that she had such a burden, and yet so much respect that she'd go through so much to care for her mother. Story 31. There was a kid in our high school who wore the same snotty sweatpants every day, babbled to himself, and made chicken noises to get attention. Very high on the spectrum. Never understood how this kid's parents could let him come to school in filthy clothes. Then Dad came to pick him up in a mail truck. Picture a cross between Newman and Rick Sanchez. Story 32, I work at an elementary school in a really bad part of town, and I teach third graders. Parents coming in reeking of pot, and parents with like 5 other kids that they obviously can't care for individually are always the worst. I've had to send many kids home with the police because parents could not decide who will pick the child up. We even hold them until after 6. But mostly the children who yell, scream, curse, and hit their parents will come in yelling and cursing at them. Story 33, why he was fluent in English, Spanish, and German. I was teaching a grade 3 class that year, if I remember correctly, and I had the pleasure of teaching this wonderful, polite young man named Mark. Mark was a delight to teach, very cheerful, picked things up quickly, got on well with the other kids. One day, we did a project on what makes me unique, and Mark was having some trouble explaining what he wanted to write. He said, well, in German it would be German expression, but in Spanish it could be Spanish warble, but I don't know how to write it in English. I asked him how he knew those languages, and he shrugged and said he thought most kids probably could, and that's all I could get out of him. Obviously, I was curious, but I didn't want to pry too far and make him feel self-conscious about it. So I just helped him with his project and waited patiently for parent-teacher interviews. Both of Mark's parents showed up to the interview, and it was clear almost immediately why he was fluent in those languages. His mother and father were lovely people, but they had the annoying habit of switching language every few words when discussing with each other, before returning me a sentence in English. I asked them how they were so fluent, and it turns out that they had moved a lot because of the father's job, and the mother's career was very flexible internet-based income one thing, so that sorted that right out, mystery solved, except that although he spoke English, Spanish, and German, both his parents were Chinese. Story 34, first year of working in my current job, not a teacher, but I do work with children on a daily basis, and I overhear this conversation between a group of 4th grade girls. Girl 1, what do you want to be when you grow up? Girl 2, I don't know, I really like dancing and stuff. Girl 3, I'm not sure either. What about you? Girl 1, I'm going to get pregnant and get food stamps and welfare. I really wish I was embellishing the story. I wish to God that I was making all or at least part of this up. When my coworker heard this, she about lost it. Well, we knew what mom was like, so it was no surprise. Unmarried, for kids at the time, and looked like she was no older than about 23. They were known amongst the staff for being in poverty. As the girls, yes. All her children were girls, frequently came in wearing the same dirty clothes, bills going unpaid, etc. We tried incredibly hard to change this. Numerous times when we had events, we set aside something specifically for this family. When my partner at work heard this, she went ballistic. She contacted the university in my town and set up a field trip with numerous guest speakers from a dance team, cheerleading team, sports teams, and a few other groups to show the kids what all they could get to do from going to college. The kids really seemed to enjoy it, especially those girls, and all they talked about the rest of the day was how cool those people were. Story 35, this is less dramatic than the others, but still one of those aha moments. An 8th grade student, great kid, 100% responsible, academically talented, and would always speak in short clipped sentences and look like he was a frightened deer about to bolt. Had a conference with him and his parents together in which the kid was supposed to be leading the conference, reflecting on his growth and identifying his challenges. Every time the kid opened his mouth to say something, he'd get halfway through the sentence and mom would finish it for him. Poor kid was always trying to get ideas out quickly so he wouldn't be interrupted. Story 36, we had this girl who was really dense. Nice girl, but there was very little happening behind the eyes. She was always stood with her mouth open and her tongue halfway out. Her dad picked her up and then came back 5 minutes later to ask if we had any bricks. We asked why. At the bottom of our car park, there is a big visible ditch where the ground has sunken. Then there's a massive curb. Again, all of this is clearly visible, so nobody goes near that end of the car park. But he thought this looked like a good way drive, put to the car park, and his car was now pivoting on the curb with his front wheels not touching the ground. We had to make a ramp out of bricks to get him free. It answered a lot of questions about the girl. Since then, get the bricks ready has become a euphemism for just spoke to a stupid parent. Story 37, I was an elementary teacher's aide for several years in college. We were having a parent-teacher conference with a struggling 5th grader and his parents. The poor kid was bright, but somewhat lazy and reading at barely a 1st grade level. The teacher laid out what we've been working on with the student individually for the last few months to try to improve his reading and get him engaged in learning. The teacher then gently suggested that the kid should be practicing his reading at home with an adult. I suggested that since the kid loved Pokemon, there were some juvenile novelizations of Pokemon stories at the local bookstore that he may enjoy, and that it would help interest and engage him in improving his reading comprehension. He'll never forget the withering look the father gave me. We don't have extra money lying around to buy something that he could do at school. I was 19 at the time and shaky around confrontation. So I lowered my gaze and shut my mouth. The teacher reassured the parents that we were doing everything in our power to help their child, and that we would continue helping their son improve his reading. That was that. A few days after this, the students were taking turns at the end of the day telling us something good that happened to them. That week, a ritual that I really admire that the teacher started. The kids loved it. When it was the struggling student's turn, he stood up and got an empty video game case and controller out of his bag and said, "This week, my dad bought the new PlayStation and lots of new games, and we've been staying up late every night playing." Almost cried in frustration and pity. Please understand, I have absolutely nothing against kids playing video games, but it has to be in moderation. His parents sat there and told us that they had no extra money to help their kid not only get better at learning, but actually enjoy doing it with something he loved, like a $4.99 book about Pokemon. But then they turn around and spend hundreds of dollars on a new PlayStation and games. Maybe buy your kid a book about video games. So frustrating.